This is James Parker, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Oh man, this is fun. So I've got James Parker on the show, and he comes to me from a friend from Benicia, and it's always fun to have Benicia represented in the house because that's where we come from. But I thought we would have you on to talk about your new book that we have. I've got to change your sign to make it actually say your name. But I guess let's talk a little bit about becoming an author because you've solved a lot of the author problems. It's one thing to want to become an author, but you've managed to learn how to sell books, learn how to tell stories, learn how to reliably create whole new worlds that are fascinating to people and that they want to be involved in. So let's just talk about that, and then I'll put your link up for your new book, and then also the website as we're chatting. Go ahead and go.
There's a lot that goes into it. I so many people whom I have met who are just voracious readers have a story in their head. We've all, how many times do you hear friends and people say, "Boy, one of these days I'm going to write a book, and it's going to be about this or going to be about that." And the only way to really approach it, and what I had to do, was simply get started. I had done X amount of writing in college. I did some for the paper at the school where I went, did some for some of the organizations I was engaged in, and then finally got into professional writing in the sense of corporations, working on marketing plans and so on. But when you get into storytelling and fiction, if you're good at relating a story about what happened to the family last year on vacation, if you're good at telling jokes. I mean, you've got that down to a science. You're good at telling small stories. So you start taking that bigger story and putting it down on paper. It's the kind of thing. And from my first novel up through the one that has just recently come out, I have to outline these stories. And by outline, I mean chapter by chapter by chapter. And the primary reason for that is I know the story, but it keeps me on track. And it helps me to keep things interesting for the reader, because you have more than one story going on in a novel. And I can also tell you that by the time you finish, your finished novel doesn't look a whole lot like the outline, because the story will grow on itself. The story will expand in its own being.
So I understand the outline process. I think we all kind of get that. You break down the big pieces that you want to get into. I'm curious, when you're doing that, does the story populate sequentially then, or do you allow yourself to go to sub 4, alpha Roman numeral 1 to write that piece out, or do you have to kind of go march through this thing in order first and then go through it? How do you deal with the outline? I mean, obviously the whole story changes and evolves, but as moments of inspiration come, do you have to commit those to pen and paper, or what do you do?
Let me give you a great example of that. And that usually happens to me later in the story, where I have to go back and fix an early part of the story. I heard an author talking one time, and they were talking about his lead character. And the interviewer said, "You must be a very witty guy because your character is a very witty guy." And he said, "No," he goes, "I'm not." He said, "Have you ever had an argument with someone or a discussion, and an hour later or later that day or the next day, you think, 'Oh, darn, if I'd only said this'? Well, I'll write the dialogue and I get it down, but it never really gets out of your head. And the next day I'm thinking about, I'm like, oh my gosh, well, if he had only said this, that'd really be funny. Well, I have the luxury of going back and changing that, and suddenly my lead character is a very witty guy." And that kind of happens with the story. I'll be going along, and I'll get to a point, maybe 2 or 3 chapters later, where something comes to me, inspiration, something I've read, all the research that I have to do, that changes the scope of where I was, and I have to go back then 2 or 3 chapters and fix what I wrote to support that. So for me, it almost happens in the reverse. It's not like writing the end first or something. I know the story. That's probably the biggest blessing I have, is I do know the story. But the characters, they take on depth. You have a backstory for each character, but they take on more depth as you go along. Even their interactions, I know this sounds crazy, but even their own interactions will lead it in different directions, and you find something that actually works better.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of my friends, who's a friend through the show and also an author, she's written a crime series called the BITE series, BYTE series, and her name's Kat Connor. And she said that the characters become her friends. And as she's chronicled this, I think it's 12 total novels within the series, as she's chronicled this, she's realized that she's left herself Easter eggs along the way, so that novel 7 is somehow tied to novel 3. Like an event there that was innocuous, it was just part of the story, becomes something that she gave herself in the future to work with. Do you find things like that happen as you get to what? And the other thing she says, and she's completely bananas, but she's like, these people, I know them. I know the music they like, the kind of clothes they want to wear. I have conversations with them when they die. I grieve. Does that resonate with you?
It does to a point. These characters do become a part of your. In an office, we work with all kinds of people, and we have around them in their different departments, and some you see more often than others. And it's kind of the same thing with these characters. I work with them every day. I work with them in building the story and being around them. And part of my job is getting to know them better. The only way I can tell the story and for it to be believable, for it to have impact, I have to get to know these people. There are times I've had people pull me aside and say, "Hey, I read your first book, or I read the second book, and this particular character, please don't kill them off. I like them," or "Please don't do." And that's a great compliment as an author, because you have people suddenly relating to who these characters are. The other thing you have to keep in mind, particularly with your hero, so to speak, none of us have a big red S on our chest. It just doesn't happen. And they have to be as flawed as we are. But they have to illustrate and show and demonstrate how they work through those flaws and how they manage. So you do become close to them. And killing a character off, that does take a lot of thought, particularly in this. This is book one of a trilogy. Again, I know the story, that helps. But will book two and book three change over time as I continue to write them? And they will. Pete, I lost something. I'm not hearing you.
Oh, there we are. There was an airplane flying overhead. Yes. So the book we're talking about right now, specifically, your current book, is called Infinity's Gate. And I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but you guys should definitely get it. It's, I don't know, what would you call it? A sci-fi thriller? Is that what you would call it? Or how do you characterize that book?
That would be, yeah, it's thriller. It's very suspenseful. I believe it's tightly written, and definitely takes on a sci-fi air to it, science fiction air to it. It's a unique story. You think, when you open the book and you read it, it opens with an actual true event that happened in our history back in 1945, right after World War II. Then jumps to present time, and we have an incident happen right off our coast where our military has to investigate. It's just too big, too strong for us to ignore. And the ship we send out looks around, can't find anything. They're preparing to leave, and then the event reoccurs, and our people are drawn into it and are taken into a situation far beyond anything they ever dreamed. And that's when it becomes a fight for survival. And they have to use every skill they've got to get through.
When you write things that have military characters in it, do you use or do you have military background, or do you use certain people to kind of flesh out some of the word choice? Like, I noticed one specifically, and I don't mean to be critical, I want to understand your process, but you use the word clip, and military people would use the word magazine, right? There's a distinct difference there, which is fine because the style of the book is your style. But how do you deal with the military words, the things you say, to keep the book as legitimate as you want it to be, or unless you're kind of painting a world that's not 100% on the now accurate style? And I don't mean to be critical, I'm just trying to understand those choices.
No, that's actually a very good question, and that's not being critical at all. Yes, I worked with 3 or 4 people who have military backgrounds. I do not. Now, my background from an education standpoint is I was career-wise headed in a different direction. And my graduate degree is criminology. And so law enforcement and dealing in that. And we have family in law enforcement. We have family in military. But in dealing with the people, even the way they talk to each other on the radio, they would be using a lot of different initials and so forth and everything. And I didn't go that route. And some words I changed, and I talked to them about it, in the sense that, yes, the military would follow that and the military would understand it. Not all my readers would. Not all my, so I think it was in some cases using more, I'll call it a generic language, than what I would typically find if it were 100% military and what was going on. And I had, it's just, yeah, even, one of the criticisms that was pointed out to me when I was writing it, is that the admiral in this, who is calling the shots, when the crisis hits them, he reaches out to our hero, who is a commander, as opposed to another character who is the actual captain of that ship.
Right.
And he pointed out to me that would never happen. The admiral would call the captain. But it's part of the story. The admiral had already given him paperwork and talked to that captain to say, hey, in the event of a problem, guess who's taking over?
You're my guy. Yeah.
And so he did reach out to the right guy. But it's just, here again, it's so good. I admire our military. I admire the people in it so much.
Yeah.
And these guys who took the time to work with me, I owe a great deal to.
The other thing I want to say too, in your defense as a fan, look, the book's fantastic. I'm completely enjoying it. I was trying to chew through it. I wish I had finished the whole thing. I will, but because the story is sticky. But the other thing is the characters are not actual military people. They're characters in a story, and they have a job to perform. And so you need some doubt, some uncertainty. Like you need emotion. Like they've got a lot of things to do besides just run a ship. You know, like a straight up military commander. That wouldn't be useful to the story in what you're doing. You're creating a really human, emotional based story. You're spending time with these different characters. Even Argos, and I don't want to again reveal too much about the book, but even Argos is its own character. It's like this omnipotent Oz kind of thing, you know, and we're getting to know what it is and the people around it and how it impacts their lives. But let's talk a little bit about when you put a story together, and again, you've written novels, so you know how this stuff works. Are you building characters like this is the captain, but he's also going to be this person, or this is the admiral and he's got to be this person, even though in real life, maybe an admiral will be much more decisive and much more, you know, whatever, some trait that isn't represented in the book, but that's not his job in the book.
I guess the best way to answer that, and this is a terrible answer, but I'll start with this, is I do want the characters themselves to be three-dimensional. They can't be cardboard cutouts. Every one of these characters has a backstory. Every one of these characters, we all have something that colors the way we act, that colors the way we respond to the people around us. The good thing about the military, and the reason, frankly, that I used the military so much in this book, particularly on the ship and what they run into, is that anybody else can't, pushed into this type of situation wouldn't last a week. The training wouldn't be there, the discipline wouldn't be there, they would not be able to coordinate. And yet everybody on that ship has some level of family somewhere, has some level of relationship, some level of life off the ship. And that's what I try to bring forth. Yes, they're real. Yes, they're in the Navy. Yes, they're going to follow orders, to a point. But they're also human. And here's a situation where you have a shipload of people that knows they have to work together if they're going to get back to those families, to those friends.
Yeah. Yeah, I can appreciate that. The complexity of the characters. Let's back up to your earlier writing days and get into when did you know, like, I actually can do this? I actually need to focus just on this, not criminology, not my idea to get an ice cream truck franchise and run that. When you sorted this out and you're like, this, because that's the thing is like, we all want to write. That's one of the dream jobs, right? I want to be a writer. I want to live in a cabin in Montana and write for 6 months. All these things, right? But that's fanciful. When you have to get down and you have to just simply look, and this. When you talk to young authors, here's how I do it. I make an outline, and that outline is detailed. And just going and doing that. Go sit down and do that. Well, I can't do that. Well, then you can't be a writer. So when did you figure out that you really, no kidding, no fooling, you're a writer?
There's a lot to answer here. First, you learn over time. You learn the trade, if you will, over time, and that takes a lot of work. And there's a good suggestion I want to give to beginning writers here in just a moment. But I think it's a lot like, why do we go to work every morning? Why do we get up and do jobs? And some of these jobs people hate, and it's because we have families, we have things we got to support, we have goals. I think in my becoming a writer, you have that why. Why are you doing this? What's happened? And part of it, Pete, if I may, goes back to an incident that happened to me in high school that greatly influenced the way I think, greatly influenced the way I look at things. And talk about something coming at you from out of the blue. Um, I don't want to completely lose your listeners here, but this happened. I was a senior. My parents both worked. They were very hardworking. My mom was a nurse, and we grew up in northern Kentucky, right across the river from Cincinnati. And in Covington, Kentucky, you have these beautiful mansions that are along the river that were there prior to the Civil War, several used in the Underground Railroad. Well, one of these mansions had been taken and converted into a nursing home, and my mom went to work there. And when they hired her, they told her, they said, look, you may see or hear things that seem a little odd. We're not telling you this place is haunted, but we are saying, please be aware. Well, she laughed it off. She came home and told us. We laughed it off, and that was about it. Well, several weeks later, she was working the night shift, which was 11 p.m. to 7 in the morning. And there was a third floor on that building that they did not use. It had like 5 or 6 rooms and an enclosed stairwell that came right down to the second floor. Well, it was a Friday night, and she called home, and she said, what are you doing? I said, well, I have a friend over. We're watching Carson. And she said, well, we keep hearing someone walk from one of that floor to the other, come down the stairs, and we're just waiting for the door to open. And I said, well, don't be silly. You've got somebody in there, call the police. She said, we have. They've been here twice. She said, would you guys mind coming over and spending the night with us? Well, we agreed to that. And Pete, I think it's important for you to know at this point in the story that my buddy and I were 2 of the bigger cowards in Campbell County, but we still decided to go over and spend the night. So we got there, and we were at the second floor nurse's station, and we're listening, and finally here came the footsteps. And Pete, if it was a mouse, he was wearing boots. I mean, you didn't have to listen, you heard it. And he came down the steps, and I'm like, look, I don't know what's going on. You're having fun with us. Call the cops again. Well, this time the police showed up, and they brought a canine unit. Beautiful dog, huge shepherd. Had never seen one that large. And they waited around, they looked, and they waited around. Nothing happened. Well, they were getting ready to leave. And I knew it was going to be just like television. They would leave, and whatever it was would come back and kill us all. Then came the footsteps. And the footsteps came, and they looked at us and told us to stay where we are. So they went down, and one cop put his hand on the doorknob, had his gun out. The other cop had the collar and the release for the dog. And when the footsteps got down to the bottom of the stairs, the one cop flung open the door. The other cop released the dog. Pete, there was absolutely nothing standing there.
Wow.
And that canine unit put its tail between its legs and backed into the wall whining. They never did get that dog to the stairs. And what that incident did was it opened my mind just to understand that we do not know everything that's out there. We don't understand everything. And so for the first 2 novels that are suspense, but on the spooky side, they were influenced by that. And this novel too is that open-mindedness, that thing to think, okay, we're not as smart as we think we are. You know, some of these people who claim we know everything, I call them the Flat Earth Society. Because centuries ago, the smartest people alive knew the earth was flat. Turned out they were wrong. And it's kind of the same thing now. There's a lot we don't know.
There sure is a lot we don't know, and we can all remember that. There's a lot of things unaccounted for. When you are designing your worlds, there's a lot of intricacy. It's one of the things that you do well is describe these things that we've likely never seen or experienced before. Is that a balancing act? Like, can you describe too much or spend too much time on a flower that is on the side of a river, or a bookcase with dust on it? Or how do you sort out, like, that's just too much description, no one needs to know that?
I try to write the stories that I personally enjoy reading. There's a style and authors who I have followed, who I admire, and I enjoy their writing. And I've tried to mirror that. And you can do too much. I think one of the keys for writers is show, don't tell. In other words, do it through your characters, do it through their dialogue, move the story along that way. And dialogue moves the story. How do you make something suspenseful? Well, you start writing shorter sentences. You make it tighter. You make it move quicker. Yeah, there are several tricks on that, and it's just you want the detail because you want them to understand what these people are experiencing and why they're responding the way they do.
Yeah.
But you can be too detailed. You can, there's a great deal of edit. Once you're done writing and you write those beautiful words at the end, you're maybe a third of the way done.
Yeah. A third, right?
Then the rewrites begin. Yeah. And it's just
No, that's great. That's great. I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about, though, right? Like the work that goes into becoming a writer. Yeah, you have to have an idea. You've got to spend a lot of time. At least I would have to in my head picturing these things and determining how to describe everything, and then figuring out how to weave a thread through this whole thing. The work is. How long does it take A to Z to get a book out of your head and bound up in a book?
Oh gosh, it's a long process. It's I would say Infinity's Gateway, the book we're talking about now, took well over a year for me to write because it's a balancing act with the day job and family and other things you have going on. But to get it written, to do the research, and then you start the editing process. I joke with people who I know that in book one, by the time the editing process was done and the rewriting process was done, I wanted to kill my own hero. I mean, it was just you just get you get to that point, but it takes the time, and then when you with the publisher that I have today, Morgan James, they have been extremely supportive, very very good to work with. But they too do a host of edits. I think I'm done. I've edited it. I'm proud of it. Mr. Publisher, here's the manuscript. They agree to run with it, and then we start all over. And they do their edits. Pete, they did a punctuation edit.
Oh my God.
I almost took offense at that. I'm like, well, guys, I know how to do a period and a comma. Boy, you wouldn't believe what they found. So anyway,
in my youth, when I was a lot more arrogant, I was working on a master's degree, and our teacher was dressing down the class as a whole, saying, "You guys have got to write better. Your writing is not good enough. It's not graduate level. You're not taking, and just basically dressed us down." And he's like, "There are too many commas," and I'm like, "That's it, damn it!" And I slam my fist down on the thing. I'm like, "I'm the author. I tell you when to breathe. If I want you to slow down, I slow you down. You don't tell me otherwise." And he's like, "Actually, Pete, your writing is fine." I was like, "Oh, all right." It's gotten worse over the years, but how arrogant is that? The professor is dressing us all down, and I'm going to tell him as the author when he's going to breathe. Authors can be dicks sometimes. When you when you are doing your day-to-day life, right? Like you again, and let's look at how successful you are. I mean, you sell books. This is what you do. And you've got Hollywood looking at scripts. You're working on a script with them. Like you are doing it. You're several measures, orders of merit above like the standard, like I'm going to get started self-published person. No problem with that journey. Anybody can be self-published. You all should write something, but you're past that. When you are doing that and you're like, yeah, I'm writing a Hollywood script, maybe that becomes a movie, maybe not, who knows, but they're working with you on it. They're letting you write your own script. These are big, big successful things. And then you realize I'm doing this super mundane thing. And if anybody could see Jim doing this act, I love asking this question to people that have reached this kind of level of success. It's always something funny. So what's something that's just mundane day to day that you do? You're like, if people could see me now, James S. Parker, the big fancy author doing this, what would that thing be?
it would be me reluctantly being pulled in, screaming and shouting over some of these boring reports that I have to write for the day job that I know in my heart no one will ever read. And yet someone's going to check a box off somewhere to say, by God, he did it. And there's that. Um, one of the things, and I'm sorry, P, I want to go back real quick. I don't want to lose sight of this. For writers out there who are starting, editing is so important, and it's hard to know yourself. You never believe what you've written is good. You say, well, yeah, you told me it's good, but you're my friend. What else are you gonna say? One of the things that helped me the most was I found what's called a critique group, and critique groups are invaluable. Right. And if you're writing mystery adventure or whatever, find 4 or 5 other people who are writing. They're writing either your genre or similar, and meet with them regularly, and let them critique your work. Let them come back. You may give them a chapter and they give you 10 things that need to be changed. Well, look at those 10 things. 7 of them, no, I don't agree with. I'm the author, just like you were saying. Flush those away. But 3 of them, hey, those are pretty good. Good catch. Those will work. And I got to tell you, from that critique group, you're going to get the encouragement and the support and a lot of what you can't get on your own. Because from a writing standpoint, from a hobby, and that's how this started, it's turned into far more. I can't think of a more masochistic hobby out there than writing.
Yeah. It's like podcasting. If you were to ask me, dollar for dollar, is it worth it, or should I just get a regular job? Like it's way better just to get a podcast, not to have a podcast and just do a regular job. But here I sit creating these things and going on this journey that no one would pick going in. I mean, the rewards are great, but it's a struggle. And you have to
Yeah,
create an
yeah,
artistic enough people will contribute for it. By the way, if you're watching this, follow on YouTube, do the subscribe thing, hit the reminder bell. That really helps. And then also, if you want to support the show, there's all kinds of places where it's out there. But go to breakitdownshow.com, hit the PayPal button, and put a couple of dollars in the coffer each month. I will put all that money back into the show. This is not for me; it's to make the show go. The more I can advertise, the more I can upgrade gear. You guys can see we've got a new camera. These things matter, and that's why we also want to say make sure we support Jim and buy his book, because it is excellent, and hopefully it does become a movie. I mean, writing a script is a big measure of success for anybody. To get to write your own script is even more rare, and to have Hollywood leave you alone and be like, no, you're doing good. We can fix up what you create. Just keep writing. This is your first screenplay, right?
yeah. In fact, the producer that signed on, she signed on back in the fall, and we probably argued for 3 weeks about who was actually going to write the screenplay. Um, and finally convinced me. She says, "Look, you know the story well enough. I think you've got what it takes. Let's do it." And so I had to get a software. It's called Final Draft. That software actually does the formatting for you. Thank heaven. And began to write this. But Pete, I got to tell you, it's still a lot like being back in the eighth grade. I will write so many pages. I send them to her and her team. They edit them, send them back to me, and I open these things up. And like, what's so funny is the email will come back and, oh, this Jim, this is good. We really like this, really like that. You're doing great. And then I open it, and you haven't seen that much red ink since the eighth grade, and you're like, what would this have looked like if you had hated it? It's one of those. So the screenplay is moving along. I would say we're approaching halfway there. Um, and frankly, she has already started to what I'll call soft pitch the film. She was going to wait till the screenplay was done and then start pitching this, but just recently had two of the studios reach out to her and has some interest there. So this thing is moving along. It's moving forward, and we're very excited about it. We've been very again blessed to come on with some good people.
Yeah, I know that's fantastic. And you're right. The amount of red that comes on the page, and that brings me back to your critique group. To be an author, to be a successful author, and until you reach a status that very few authors ever get, you have to accept edits, and you have to accept changes that you don't necessarily agree with, because everybody's trying to make your book better. You've got to marshal some of
Mm-hmm.
that stuff, but it requires thick skin and some pretty strong character to have someone just tear apart your stuff, but know that they're doing it out of love. Like when I challenge you on clip versus magazine, I don't do that to harm your book. I do that to understand why, as an author, you make that choice, because you certainly don't have to make that choice. So how do you recognize your own shortcomings in terms of ego and thin skinnedness versus uh, saying no to good advice and making that the right choice?
Well, I always tell my wife that the only people I can't get along with are those who are more conceited than I am, and fortunately, there are very few of those. So I tend to get along well. You learn over time. It's like anything else. If whatever your day job is, whatever it is you do for a living, if you're with others, if you're not open to criticism, if you're not open to learning how to do things better, you're going to struggle with anything. And it's not the sense of criticism in the sense of someone just being negative for the sake of being negative and tearing into you. It's someone who's actually trying to help you. Every mentor I've had along the way has shown me a better way to do things, a way to expand. I have an editor now who works with me very closely. And Don is not shy about telling me, hey, let's make it bigger. You're not doing this, you're not doing that. But you have to be open to that. You can't be that sensitive. And especially new writers. My editor, Don, he told me this from the beginning. He goes, if your lead character's name is Bob, and the publisher reads the book and said, I hear it, but I think your lead character should be John. Guess what? The lead character is now John. It just
Yeah.
because you want to get the book published, you want to get out there, but you do have to be open and willing to work with people on those types of criticisms.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we had this guy Dorian Linsky on the show, and he wrote a really fantastic biography of the book 1984 from George Orwell, and it's really kind of a co-biography, because there's the George Orwell stuff, and then there's like, how do you get to write this incredible book? And it wasn't called 1984 until the very, very end. It was called The Last Man in Europe. And then he finally said, you know what, I'm going to call it 1984. That wouldn't fly today. Like if you're an author, like I'm going to call this book 1984, the book publisher would be like, no, you're not. You're going to call this thing whatever, and they would have a different title, and it wouldn't. And there's something about that title that worked, that no one could know in advance, but it worked, and it made that book something special. So sometimes the publishers aren't right. I mean, look, all the publishers that were wrong about J.K. Rowling, Rowling. I mean, over and over and over again, they got that wrong. So they're not reliable, but they do have a say.
Yeah, they do, and I was very fortunate that they kept the title that they kept here. Really didn't get from my publisher. Really didn't get anything in the way of, well, the story drags here, or you need to pick up the pace there, or gosh, this just isn't clear. Can you clarify? We're fortunate enough that we didn't get that, but then again, I had worked with several really good people to get to that point, and had really helped make the book tight. To say that I did this on my own would be as big a fiction as what I wrote. So it's just, you do have to work with others, because there's a lot of talented people out there in the writing world, and they will help you if you ask for it.
Do you struggle saying this book is done in terms of your words that you're putting into it? I mean, sure, it's got to be bound and get an ISBN number and all that stuff, but do you ever feel like it's done? And then when it is done, how do you know you're like, that's it, I'm not making this thing any, because you could spend it forever not writing a book,
You could be in, you could be in terminal rewrite. You get that's where the team you're working with comes in. You feel it, and you just confirm it with them. And sometimes what's interesting is, again, in believing the work is good. Do I like Infinity's Gateway, and am I very proud of it? Absolutely. And but it's when you start getting people who don't know you, or people who, like yourself, have read it and say things, or we've had 2 top-line professional reviewers take it on.
Yeah.
And do good things. That's when you really feel validated that, wow, this just might be good. And the people I'm working with on the movie side, the producer, they didn't pick this up because they were bored.
Right.
I mean, I'll tell you, it was so interesting. My publicist who reached out to this producer, they've known each other for years, and he started to talk to her. He goes, look, I'm representing this guy. He's got this book. I want you to look. She cut him off. She said, I don't read books. You send me a book, I'm going to throw it in the garbage can. She goes, if he's got a screenplay, send it over. But other than that, we're done. And he said, well, you at least talk to this guy. So we had a conversation, and I guess the conversation went really, really good, because at the end of it, she said, send me the book. She read it, and here we are today. But they have a lot going on. I mean, these are extraordinarily busy people. And when they take on a project, they've bought into it.
Not only are they extraordinarily busy, they get offered a lot of stuff, So we had Tony Toast on. Tony Toast is probably best known for being one of the executive producers. He started as like a junior writer and went all the way up to the top of Longmire because he knew that world. He grew up in a trailer park on the edge of an Indian reservation. And he said, it's not good enough to have someone read your screenplay and go, wow, that's really good. They have to be like, oh my God, that's the best thing I've read all year. Is that idea, that buy-in has enough energy to get it through to the next level. Otherwise, it's just not good enough. You've got to go back and the good thing about screenplays is you can always work them. You can always polish them. You can always bring in new elements. You can always, and you can continue to rewrite screenplays. It doesn't work with books, but screenplays can evolve like that. The process of screenwriting though is different. I mean, you've got final draft. You don't need to write too much. Like you don't need, as the screenwriter, you don't need to do the director's job. You need to say interior of a bar, and then you just give it a little bit of that, right? It's a different world, and your world in Infinity's Gate is complex. So talk about
Infinity's Gateway is there are things in that you have to describe, you have to tell the reader, and go through. And again, I try to do that through the characters and so forth, what they're experiencing and everything. But on the screenplay, it's tough. It's just I'll write some action, I'll write some direction, just in the sense of what's going on, what's supposed to happen. But even the dialogue is trimmed. And they laid one on me a couple of weeks ago that I hadn't anticipated either. They said, once we're done, once we're in, the studio picks it up, and the movie is completely cast, that's when we will also rewrite part of the screenplay, because we don't know who they're going to cast as this character. and we may have to change something to adapt to that actor, and that will simply make it better. So yeah, it's just I want to be able to talk about it and expand on it and describe it, and it's the director's job, it's the cinematographer's job, not mine.
Yeah. And again, ego, right? Like you've got a very specific job. It's hyper important, but you also have to give the actor room to act. You know, if you put too many words, you're taking them out of the shot. And it's easy to dismiss actors and go, they just stand there and read the lines. But that's not true. You know, these
No,
guys, if they're good, they're taking your stuff and you're going, oh my God, that's so much better. Maybe they've edited a word out, and that's not common. I mean, you know, actors typically will perform what's there because that's what their job is. But you know, I've had actors on the show and they'll say sometimes like this one little twist, this one little I know my guy. They know your character better than you do. You know, they know they know their guy, and they know how they're going to look, how they're going to sweat. They can make their body respond in a way that, you know, as detailed as you are, they're like nano detailed when they really get it, you know?
well, and they become that character. I mean, I got it. You know, two friends of mine who actually do this for a living. The one in particular, and we joke with her a lot about this, but she is constantly cast as either the bad girl or the villain. And she said, "There's no greater compliment for me if I meet someone who has seen this TV show or seen this film and tells me how much they just hated me for what I did here." She goes, "I've done my job."
Yeah.
Because that person is not supposed to be a nice person. So it is interesting. It's I always tell people when a movie's going off, look at the credits.
Yeah.
Look at the gazillion people it took to pull that off.
Yeah. 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 And you're like the first guy to work. Everybody else works after you too. So you really kick this thing off in a direction. Sure, there's executive producers and that kind of stuff, and they're there with you in the early part, but without you, none of those people are employed, you know, and it's incredible. It's an incredible responsibility. Like Tom Cruise, when he talks about like, I'm going to break my ankle, I don't care, I'm going to keep working. These folks all have to pay bills, and it's not going to be me that lets them down, you know?
Yeah.
It's an incredible endeavor. It's more than a village. It's a city of people. I mean, you look at, and some of these names are a company that has 50 people working on this one part of the project, you know? It's crazy.
No, it's a fun process. I'm in conversations now that I never dreamed of. You know, it's been a very surreal process. And like I say, the book, you know, Infinity's Gateway, it's book one of three,
Right.
and so we're excited about that because they're even changing now the course we may take. You know, up until now, it's been movie, and now the words keep being intermixed. I'll hear film, I'll hear episode. I'll hear film, I'll hear episode. And if they were to take this episodic, I think it would be even more exciting because we could truly then tell more of the story.
And video game, quite honestly.
Yeah, that the gamers, this would work. This would work very well because of what we've created. Yeah, there's and you know, I got to tell you, book two, not to be too big of a tease, but book two will expand on that even so much more.
Yeah, I bet. So the and just for everybody, it's called Infinity's Gate. I think I said it wrong.
Infinity's Gateway.
Infinity's Gateway. Yeah, I said it wrong again. Infinity's Gateway, and it's really good. I mean, I've got my. Oh, actually, it's here somewhere. Oh, here it is. There it is, right there. Infinity's Gateway, and I'm reading it, and you can see right here. I'm this far through it, right there. And chapter 16. No fooling. And I definitely recommend you guys get the book. I mean, use the link down below for Amazon to help me out. That will give a little bit of money to both. Well, Jim and myself will get paid a little bit if you buy it through that link. But even just get the book if you're at all or into thrillers, science fiction, that kind of thing. It's such a fun ride. It took a minute to get going. I got to be honest. Sometimes books jump in and go, but it's a lot more like Clancy, where you're like, you got to spend 50, 60, 75 pages. Like, okay, I think we got it. Now I got the field. Okay, now we're doing something. But it's just, it picks up the pace and it picked up the pace. And I hate to even put it down. I wanted to just keep reading it all day, you know, but I didn't. I ran out of time. I had to talk to you, fortunately. Let me ask you this. I'm going to go back to the editing thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Pete, if I may, true confession, I've tried to write this 2 or 3 times before.
Okay.
And just couldn't get it down on paper. I didn't know how to start it. I couldn't get it going. And finally, this time we succeeded. But yeah, this story's been in my head for a long time.
Yeah.
It's hard.
So I want to ask you then, since we're talking about the story, let's go. And this again won't ruin anything for anyone in the book, but you have this Flight 19 idea that gets the story started. And am I correct in thinking they've still never found this flight of airplanes, right? And this is the one
It's
Bermuda Triangle has.
not only have they not found it, when Flight 19, which was made up of 5 Avenger bombers, lifted off. World War II is over, Hitler's gone, but we're still training our people. And the leader of Flight 19, extremely experienced. He had flown in the Pacific. He had several kills. And the guys who were in the other bombers who were training, they weren't newbies either. They had a fair amount of hours. So the tower started picking up what they thought was, plane in distress, and nothing was working. Navigation, compass, even the horizon. They said the ocean looked odd. So all that is real, and I took from history, and it happened. When they finally lost contact, they reached out to Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station, reached out to the Banana River Naval Air Station, and they sent out a Mariner. Mariner can land on the water, and that was to be the rescue vehicle. They got one radio message back from the Mariner that the mission was underway, and was never heard from again. And we did the largest land and sea grid search that we had done in our history after that time. There was no oil slick, no debris. Those guys were never heard from again. And to date, I mean, there's been so many shows. I can't tell you how many shows have been done on that part of the world where they're looking for those planes and they don't find them. But it wasn't until years later that a reporter in South Florida coined the phrase Bermuda Triangle. But it's one of those mysteries that it's hard to walk away from.
Yeah, I mean, like the Bermuda Triangle thing is not, I don't want to say it's debunked, but we understand if you take the same 3 coordinates for a lot of places that are near a shore, and it turns out like there's a Bermuda Triangle in the Eastern Sierra, because all of the weather and wind comes off and hits the western side of the Sierra and just creates this huge rolling, air pattern that puts planes on the ground. That's how that dude from who founded North Face, this is like a fantastic pilot, and can't keep his plane in the air, because it's just such a crazy place. And to have, like you said, 70 years, this massive search, 70 years, people continuing to look for it. I mean, Amelia Earhart's plane disappearing is one thing, because that's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But this is a finite, although big, search area. Even if they're over in the dry Tortugas, someone somewhere would have found it, because a lot of that water isn't so deep that you couldn't just fly over and be like, there's airplanes down there.
Yeah.
It's
There's
crazy.
a lot. Well, and you were talking about that other place, and Lake Michigan, another prime example of the number of, so they happen a lot. I chose this area because that mystery has always, stayed with me as a kid, and chose it, but did provide a great launching pad for the story itself.
Yeah. What part of the book got you the most excited as you were writing it?
I think the real is when they get to a couple parts. I don't want to do too much in the way of spoiler alert here, but a couple parts when they do come across one of the planes from Flight 19. There's kind of an ironic twist to it. Great, we found the plane, we know where it is, and now we're the ones that were lost. It's just they have no idea where they are. When they first meet, they're saved from the very violent incident that they face, and someone intercedes to save them. Then they suddenly have a totally new realization to deal with. Boy, are we not alone. Here it is.
Yeah, that line stood out. And basically what you said is, I found this incredible thing, but actually I've joined the lost,
Yeah.
It's just such a great line. Good job. I actually made a mental note of that as I was reading. I kind of mentioned that too, that it's I love a turn of phrase or a re-perspectiving of a problem. And you look at something and you like flip it around 180 degrees. I mean, that's a combat lesson, right? Like, what is this like for somebody else in this situation? Like you go into a combat zone and everything's dangerous, dangerous, dangerous. Your government is doing you a favor. It's helping you. It's safer here now. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. Like these things don't work, right? Like they don't work. You can't claim something that's so dangerous that you're kitted up and using all of your electric countermeasures while they're walking around in regular clothes, and tell them that everything's working great for them when you act like it's terrifying there, like these things require a different perspective to see, so you can go, this problem is different than I thought it was.
Yeah, this thing changes. It's just, even my editor, he was so pleased with it, and he is tough to please.
Good.
But he liked, just when I think I know where this story's going, you went and moved all the chess pieces on me. And he said that, and just went in a different direction.
This is what makes it a great ride. I mean, you're right. It continues to evolve, and you're like, huh, yeah. And then at the right time, you take this magical Argos character and you like take it out of the story if you need to, or there's something that it's great because it's like you want it to have all the answers, but it can't, and because it doesn't theorize, it has limits on it. It's interesting.
Argos, as a character, as a computer, has a lot of AI built into it. And I think, from a true real life, what scares Jim Parker today, AI is one of those. I'm in the high tech industry today, and was talking with a friend of mine a couple of years ago, and told me of an incident where they had an AI system for a project that they had proposed to the government, and the government had their own AI system for the same project, but it would be good to bring the two together. So in a closed environment, couldn't get out, closed environment, they connected the two systems and they started to work to see if this project would be a go. And it went fantastic. Things were moving well, things were doing good, and everything worked up until the two AI systems decided to create their own language to become more efficient. And he said, Jim, we couldn't break the code. We couldn't figure it out. And he said, so we pulled the plug. And he said, my God, if that had gotten out on the internet, I don't know what would have happened. But it was just, it's one of those things where it's the sword cuts both ways. It can be a tremendous asset to us. It can be a tremendous danger.
Yeah. So, okay, you've got everything moving forward. I mean, you've got to be tickled pink with the screenwriting and the backing of an executive producer. And those folks, once they get it, like there's different levels for those guys. Once they get it, like if they're interested and willing to kind of go along, but once you get them over the edge and they're like, I got this. I don't want you to worry about this stuff anymore. I want you to worry about the story. That's where I need your attention. Money, whatever it is, I'll handle all of that. That's my job. Once they get it, your project really has legs. It sounds like you're either at that point or just before it, like where things are really positive and happening. Does that change how the other two novels are going to be in the trilogy? Like, do you have to get bigger? I mean, again, bring up J.K. Rowling. Book one is pretty thin, but all of a sudden, books got bigger and bigger and more detailed and better. So, what are your thoughts on books 2 and 3?
Well, to compare myself to J.K. Rowling would be, boy, so extraordinarily unfair to her. I will just say that I understand, book one, these are little kids and kind of their perspective, and they faced challenges that only extraordinary little kids could handle, and they were extraordinary. But as those books proceeded, those kids got older, and they started growing, and hormones kicked in, and she was able to bring in more of the story that she had in her head, and that's where book 2 and 3 is going. Book one is going to be a great introduction to the characters. It's going to be a great introduction to where they are, but nobody really knows where they are. And some of these things start to be revealed in 2 and 3, and then the actual reason why they're there in the first place. I mean, none of this is happenstance. There's reasoning behind everything, and it's one of the things that I'll even point out now, and is what I try to do in my writing, and point out now to your listeners in the sense that when you're watching a TV show, they don't do anything that they're not going to use. In other words, in the very beginning of the show, if the guy is sneezing his head off and she says, "What's wrong with you?" "I'm allergic to oranges." They didn't put that in there because they needed filler.
Right.
That's going to play a role somewhere down the road.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same thing with the books that I write. There are things in there right now that happen, and you think, well, they're beyond that. They passed it. It's past now. Gosh, that was suspenseful. Didn't do it because I needed a suspenseful scene.
Yeah.
It will play a role coming up. And so those are the things where we start to weave them together. There's even the first 2 novels that I wrote, which are mystery fiction on the spooky side, different cast of characters. There's one of the characters in Infinity's Gateway that is actually tied to those 2 novels.
Oh, good.
And that will become more revealing as time goes on, because there again, I found it necessary and that it would be important to do.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, reality plays a big role in this book too, because they're struggling with what is reality. So is Argos. I mean, they're all trying to figure out from the data they've got what the heck is going on. And I don't think this ruins the book at all. Maybe it enhances it, but we know they're lost, right? We've talked about that earlier. When and where they are, we just don't know. And that where can be can be anywhere, right? And they're trying to sort this out. And so I think an interesting thing where you create a lot of tension in the book is because they don't know when and where they are, and because reality is not what they think it is. they have to act in a very cautious yet audacious way. Like it's like this cloaked audacity, where you can't just go run forward because you might be running in the wrong damn direction, right? And this is a
Yeah.
place where every footfall is something that can create a problem that you can't get out of. And here's the thing that a lot of folks don't know, like in terms of, I always bring up modern combat stuff. Sorry, I'm just gonna, because I think it's a good example. When you picture a firefight, if you're on patrol in Afghanistan and you're 2 miles away from the camp, you are in effect by yourself. No one's going to get in any kind of reasonable time, and you have rounds, but all of a sudden you don't have enough rounds if you're
No.
you might have, look, I mean, a combat load is 210 rounds for an M60 and M4 rifle, right? 210 rounds, that's 7 magazines. You can shoot through those really fast. And all of a sudden you're like, we have hours more to go, And so I can understand that. Like, and the other thing is when help comes, whether it's for Flight 19, right? Or the that the incredible story that Angelina Jolie told from Unbreakable. When the ship goes, or their plane goes down in the Pacific, a large number of the rescue planes did not come back as well. Like it was like
Yeah.
it's not like a 50-50 proposition or something that they wouldn't come back. It was crazy. When I read the book, I couldn't believe that. So the rescue team, you want them to be like this cavalry, but in the case of Afghanistan, since we're using that example, if you go run 2 miles into the future and you get into this hard firefight, you can't be so worn out from getting there that you're not able to respond. And so that 2 mile run is now a 2 mile trot. And you
Yeah.
can only, it's not as fast as your slowest person. It's as fast as you're able to get there and be combat effective when you get there. And so your characters are out in this unknown, and there's really no real cavalry that's going to come in any kind of real time. And they're going to always be short on supply. Like, I don't know where they're going to get food and fuel from here. At some point they've got to figure that out. And I've not gotten to that part of the book, but that's a real thing. We have to feed these people. We have to keep them warm. They need energy, in terms of electricity. All these things are problems when you're in a position like that. Like, they haven't had to worry about it, but pretty quickly they're going to have to ration heavily to survive the unknown.
Yeah, and it clearly is going to become, and that's where part of the characters that I added from a civilian standpoint. The Navy in the very beginning, Pentagon, did not know what we were dealing with, and so when they sent this ship out, there are civilians on board. The civilians are there because they are specialists in those fields.
Right.
But as the book one continues forward, you'll find that some of those have other interests as well. Yes, my field is physics, and I do this and this. But hey, paleontology also has kind of been a hobby of mine, and this type of thing, and so they start to get fields that will help them. But the Marine Corps, the Marine training, even the Navy training, the idea of living off the land. When that shore party goes in, they find streams. Okay, boom, there's fresh water.
Right.
When they go in, there are things walking around the jungle. What can be eaten, what can't. So they're going to be in a tenuous spot, and it's in the fuel situation. Did concern me in the beginning, but I made the ship powered by nuclear power, so they got their own little reactor on board. So they're pretty good on power, but on supplies and ammunition and frankly medical supplies, that's going to be in short demand.
Sure.
And because they were only out there, they had just gotten restocked, but even again after 2-3 weeks, you're feeding and taking care of a lot of people.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I was wondering if we were going to have like a tanker, go with them. Or like some kind of supply ship. Like, let's not worry about that for a long time. But they didn't. It's just them. They go and they go by themselves. But you're right. A Navy floats with friends because it takes a lot to keep a big metal box on top of the, because the ocean is trying to sink your ass. No matter if you're a person or a boat, it's going to continue to try to destroy whatever you are and break things and rust things out and everything else. It's a fantastic book. Infinity's Gateway is just, it's fun, man. I can't wait to read it. I can't wait. When will the next book be out?
We're looking at possibly a year and a half. I was actually into the writing of book 2, was probably 2, 3, 4 chapters into that. And then both my publisher and the producer, we just agreed, set that aside, get the screenplay done, get that finished, and then go back to book 2. Yeah. And so right now, that's where the focus is on getting that completed and get that out.
Yeah, no, it's neat. What should I have asked you that I didn't ask you?
What should you have asked me, Denise? in the sense of book 2, and this will take on more meaning when you get to the end of book 1. Is what do you think? What I think has brought a lot of people into it, and I think it is that telling a story, and yet it's only book 1 of a trilogy, and it's kind of like Lord of the Rings. After book 1, I had to go find book 2. It just there it is. And in this one, Dennis, my publicist, who I work with very closely, and again, he and his wife Susie, very talented. When I sent him the manuscript, we met for lunch to talk about where we'd go next, and this was 3 or 4 years ago. And we sat down, and he goes, "Okay, look, I just have to know. Here's where you left it. What happens next?"
What happens next? I gotta know. Yeah.
I just smiled and said, "Well, you're going to have to wait to book 2." And he smiled. He said, "Well," he goes, "one of 2 ways we can handle this. You can either tell me what's going to happen in book 2, or I can take you outside, slap you around a little bit, and then you can tell me what's going to happen in book 2." But no, I think it's the kind of thing where the story's enjoyable, the characters are believable, they're fun, and I think it's just it's going to draw the reader in. I think that's going to keep them wired.
I love the addition of a chaplain too, by the way. And, the chaplain's got a very defined role, and these guys are going to struggle. I should say the crew is going to struggle because they're under high stress all the time. I mean, all kinds of things are happening to them. They're in a place they don't know. And it's like Jim disappeared. So we'll just get to look at my handsome face for a second here. Either way, I guess what I'll say, I'll wrap this up in case Jim doesn't come back in. Hey, everybody, get Infinity's Gateway. There is the, God dang it, I typed it wrong. Can you believe that? Infinity's Gateway. That's what I get for working when I'm, I should be paying attention. Infinity's Gateway is the name of the book. Infinity's Gateway. And that link will get you there. And it's by Jim S. Parker. And we will get everything dialed in here. Have Jim back on once he's there. Read this book. Let me know what you guys think, because it's I've enjoyed it. And so I'm going to sign off here. We're going to run the reel. Thank you, everybody, for checking out the show today. And here we go. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for watching the Break It Down Show.